The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Do you spend tons of hours hunched over a table building and painting models? Maybe you're up late at night reading about all the Warhammer 40K lore. Whatever your optical needs, Serious Readers has got you covered. They produce amazing, high-quality HD lighting which simulates daylight indoors. It's amazing for painting or reading, and it's recommended by over 500 opticians. You can use discount code AOW to save £100 on any HD light that's over £100. That's over $100. Visiting landing page seriousreaders.com/AOW. That's seriousreaders.com/AOW. With the discount code AOW, there's a link below in the description of the podcast episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. This week, we're joined by a very special guest, Russell Tassin. Russell, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Nick. How you doing?
I am doing great, and I'm really excited for this episode because Russell just did the unthinkable. He's taken an army that was once king of the meta, Chaos Space Marines, and then they had a rough balance status late in past few months have not been kind to them. But Russell has taken them 5-1 finish, second place at a major tournament, which is something really commendable, and that's what we're here to talk about. Russell, congratulations.
Thank you, Nick, and I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, our Chaos Discord was clawing at the mouth, begging me to get you on. And I was like, absolutely, we're getting you on. This is awesome.
Thank you.
So for those of you who don't know, this is part one of a two-part conversation. In part one, we're going to talk about Russell. We're going to get to know him, what kind of a madman plays CSM even in the dark times, and then does well with them, what his playstyle is and approach to the game. Then we're going to break down the actual list that he took to the event, and then we're going to learn about how it works on a very strategic level, what kind of the general playstyles are, and how it works, secondaries, that kind of stuff. In part two of our episode, that's going to be for patrons only. You can support the show at AOW40K.com. It's $5 a month, gets you access to this part two, along with 230 plus other episodes and their part twos, and our amazing Discord server where you can talk about these ideas. So in that episode, we're going to talk about how it all works, how it works on the table, micro 40K, matchup strategies, specific games Russell actually played at this tournament. That's where all the nitty-gritty good stuff is. So definitely check over to patreon.com/AOW40K to support the show. So anyway, Russell, tell me a little bit about you. How did you get into Warhammer?
So, long story short is after I got out of the Army, I spent my first few years out drinking and having a good time. And then it was a life-changing event. I lost one of my best friends from the Army, and then went through a period of, trying to find something different than drinking and things that way. So one of my best friends in the world, Robert Wood, who I grew up with, brought me an Imperial Night, and he goes, how about this? This is a hobby. And we started talking about it. I was like, I remember wanting to get into that in high school. I just couldn't afford it, which was back in the 90s. And back then, when I did try to get into it, I had bought this really cool metal model, and it was Abaddon. And I fell in love with it back then, but like I said, I couldn't play it. And I went to the Army and completely forgot about Warhammer 40K until he brings me this Imperial Night. Anyways, long story short, it leads to me buying a Dark Vengeance box set to get Dark Angels. And then it also came with some CSM and a really cool Hellbrute. And then I spent my first year of 40K trying to figure out what I'm doing, building armies. And I started with Dark Angels from that box set. And I ended up going to LVO, I think it was back in 2020, right before COVID. And I just got wrecked. And then I met somebody along the way, Georg Bobkov. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's another big guy in the Chaos community. So between that and that Dark Vengeance box set, I got into Chaos Space Marines. So I said, you know what, if I'm going to lose, I might as well lose with the worst army. So I stared playing Black Legion back when it was one of the worst armies anyway.
I forgot that was so long ago.
Yeah, one wounded things. And I got kicked in the teeth for about a year playing them. And then I went to an event and ended up winning a major with Black Legion during that big orc meta with the squig buggies and all that. So Dreadnoughts and Abaddon got me my first GT, and I was hooked on Black Legion. And
wow. So you've been a Chaos loyalist basically since then?
Yes. So matter of fact, this last year was my fourth year as the top Black Legion player, and I placed in the top 5 of CSM every year. And I was the top CSM player 1 year. Matter of fact, I got to sit next to Siegler, getting my Best in Faction trophy the second time he won LVO. So
Wow, Russell, that's awesome. I had no idea you were such a beacon of the CSM community. That's really cool.
yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks
And thank you
thanks
for
to Joe
sharing
for
that
me.
story about how you got into Warhammer. A lot of people just get in as their kids, kind of like, I did that. And a lot of hear you come from the army and just losing your best friend and getting into it that way is a nice thing that it can be an outlet for somebody like that on an emotional level. It's cool.
Yeah, and it's definitely helped me get my life on track. Get away from drinking and thinking about stuff, other stuff. And I mean, even now when I have tough times, I can just go sit down and do a little bit of hobby, and it pulls me out of it.
That's
And I
awesome.
got
I'm really happy you found that through the hobby. It's really good for that. Exactly. So you've been playing CSM since the dark times. The dark times of one wound models in the realm of two wound intercessors. It was just not good to be a CSM player. And you were able to basically train with weighted clothes, if you will, and learn to play 40K on expert mode. And then eventually your army got buffed a little bit and now we're crushing GTs. Tell me about that.
yeah. So over time, CSM goes up and down, and I actually prefer when we're on the downside because to me it's a little bit funner to play 40K on my back foot in a weird way. So like just this previous meta before this last data slate, when you roll up to the table, people see CSM and they roll their eyes, and it's like, oh. So when you get like a 5-1 finish with that, no one cares, and it's not as fun because it's a little bit easier. But then your army gets hit hard, and now the internet's not talking about them anymore, and you get to be creative, and try to find a different way to win. And that's where I really love the game, is playing the
I
faction that
really
I love.
appreciate that approach. I think that's so awesome. Like, as someone who likes to be creative with list building and maybe not play the optimal meta thing, but I enjoy also my factions aren't the best thing in the game. Keeps people away from the faction except for the people who actually enjoy it, and it's very fun to problem solve. So tell me about that, because obviously CSM were phenomenal at the beginning of 10th and all through those early months, and chosen rhinos everywhere. And like you said, going 5-1, everyone went 5-1 with that army. That's whatever.
Right.
So
Well, I actually got lucky in 10th. When it first started, I went a different route from the Chosen and the Chosen and Accursed Cultist initially. I did like Obliterators and the big Abaddon brick, and I ended up playing Ben Jerk at the final last year in LSO, which we had a super tight game. And Ben ended up pulling it out. I drew a capturing enemy outpost and failed
I
the
think I
charge.
actually watched that game, Russell.
Oh, it was such a good game. Me and Ben had such a great game. So like I would play Ben Jerk any day of the week. That was a great game, and it was
awesome.
a great ending to a big tournament too. So
Right, that's
and again,
really exciting.
And at the time, like the Chaos forums are like, what's Russell doing? That list is not good. But for at the time, player plays terrain. I had a bunch of 2-up saves in the army, and that was my whole strategy. It might not work on GW terrain, but it was perfect for being in the open and getting shot. And that's ultimately what got me to the top table with Ben.
So it sounds like you're very much a faction specialist with CSM, right? And like you know how to tailor your army, it seems, for the environment you're playing in, the missions, the terrain format, et cetera. How much of your game plan is actually centered around tailoring your list for the environment you're going into versus just playing a generic CSM list?
I'll be honest, I don't even start to really build my list until I see a player packet. I play lists that I like and have fun with, and then as soon as I see a player packet, I throw terrain on the table. Luckily, I got Joey Rexer. I'm sure you've heard of Rexer's Lasers. Every time I'm like, if I know I'm going to Alamo, I'll call Joey up and be like, hey, cut me a set of that terrain or cut me a couple sets, and then me and the team start practicing on that terrain, and we build our list from there. Because I mean, it's a war game. You got to know the conditions of the battlefield before you even know, do I bring tanks or do I bring melee? So.
Do you think that's your military background kind of instilling that in you, or is that like the tried and true method you perfected over time just playing Warhammer?
I think it's a bit of both, because I think I brought some of my military background to it initially, but then I did really well in my local area, and then the first time I went to a GT was Alamo in San Antonio, and I won my first game, I won my second game, and I thought, man, I'm doing awesome. And then I ran into a guy named Nate Goodfellow, and he wrecked me, and all of a sudden I realized I'm not as good at this game as I thought I was.
That's a wake-up call everybody gets at least once.
Yeah, and then from there I had to take what I was learned early in 40K and just previous life I brought to 40K, and then kind of developed a game plan. And I have to say, I've got a really strong group of guys that I play with, and that helps a lot. I mean, I think having a good pot of players brings up an entire area. So I'm on SF40K, and we've got a really great team. And just looking at the Champions Cup team in December, and I'm sure you have the same issue. It's like, okay, we can only take 8 guys, but we got 14 guys that could that could go and do just as well. So that, I think that's the real success to 40K, is finding a good community and then building each other up. And then the better you play, the better your buddy plays, the better he plays, the better you play, and so forth. And I mean, Art of War is a prime example of that. You've got a great group of guys and y'all practice hard together and y'all problem solve together. And then when you go to GTs, you see you all got good placings. Like this GT that we just went to, I'm number 2, and then we got another guy at 6 and another guy at 10. And that's, so I think a lot of it is finding the right people to play 40K with, and then you can get good at it.
I think that's a really great answer. I mean, ultimately, I've interviewed like 230 people plus for this show, and I don't think I've ever had that answer as for how you get better, right? So, like, that's such a huge part of it. And a lot of players do this online through TTS or, in person. If you can get a local scene that's competitive, that's not too bad of a drive for you, you can just kind of get some games. You don't have to necessarily meet at a store. People meet at houses, whatever. And you just play Warhammer and push each other to get better. Very open cards on the table, information, like let's just beat each other into the ground to get better kind of thing. How do you find for you, Russell, those players that are similar mindset, all trying to get better? And how do you cultivate that environment to be positive instead of like toxic where you're trying to beat each other?
So one thing that SF40K does is obviously we find good players, but we also find new players, but it's all about attitude. So for example, I was at a GT earlier this spring, and one of our guys is playing this guy, and this is like his second GT, and he's got this great attitude. He's wanting to learn from my teammate and all that. So my teammate comes over and like, this is the guy. He's got a great attitude, right? Well, we picked him up, and then his next GT he went 5-1. His next GT he went 5-1, and at this GT he almost went 5-1. And there was an interaction with the clock, and then he ended up letting Kit take the game. But I mean, it was he's competing with people like Kit at that level already. And that was just going out and finding somebody with the right attitude. And so one kind of internal policy we have is like, if we pick up a veteran player, we also got to pick up a newer player. And we're trying to cultivate this like coaching environment. Like I said, we're bringing each other up. That way everybody can play up, everybody can play down. And it also helps keep our community fresh and our team fresh.
I think that's awesome. That's a really great way to do it too. I love if you pick up a veteran player, you pick up a new player, really keeps the new blood in. Like you said, helps elevate those newer players. And this guy is a great example of someone who gets really good really fast. We've had that on the show before as well. Like some people just get it. I don't know, where they can learn 40K so quickly. But kind of regardless though, when you look for a player to add to your community, or if you're looking for a community to get into, what are you looking for in that person?
I think it's a general attitude. Like for example, like you can be competitive at 40K, but you don't have to be a jerk at 40K. I'll give a prime example. A guy that's been on Art of War is Gagno, right? I played Gagno at a US Open like 2 years ago. And I tell you what, it was the cleanest game of 40K I've ever played. Talk about great attitude throughout, very transparent with each other, making sure, that old saying, this is a hard game, let's get through it together. We had a super competitive game, but we never had any gotcha moments. There was a lot of great communication. There was laughing. There was high-fiving, for example.
That's Gagno awesome. I'm really glad you had that experience, yeah.
So Gagno killed Abaddon in Melee with his towel.
With his towel?
Yeah, with his towel. So, but that led to like a huge high-five moment. Like, whoa, that's freaking awesome. So guys that still can be competitive at 40K while having fun and not being a jerk, that's the type of guys that we're looking for.
Right, over like raw skill or inherent like talent with the game.
Right. And I think the more you get people like that together, the more that attitude is fostered. I think it does make you a better 40K player, because if you don't have to do the gotchas, you don't have to have your opponent forget stuff. All you're doing is making yourself a better 40K player while not being, a jerk. So
right. I mean, it's definitely the attitude and atmosphere we try to instill with Art of War. It's really awesome to see, Russell, you and your community are kind of in a very similar mindset. And it's true. Not only does it make you like enjoy your games more, have more friends, be a better person in general, but it also like will make you better, because I promise the gotcha strategy stops working if you get into a big enough pond. Like the top players know the rules. Like it's just not going to work. So you're only going to get so far.
You're 100% right, because if I'm playing gotcha on the middle tables, when I get to the top table, when I'm playing somebody like you or Gagno or Ben Jerk, there's no gotcha there. They know exactly what my stratagems say when the activations happen. So like you've got to know the game, and you've got to know how to play through that without those moments happening, or you'll never compete at a high level.
Right. So let's shift the topic a little bit, because now we're kind of getting into how to get better on a philosophical sense, and I like a lot. But with regards to you, Russell, like what do you think your play style is? I know you shift in malleably it to whatever the tournament pack is saying, but you've got to have like an aggressive mind, defensive mind, or like a certain type of units or approach to the game. What is that for you?
My overall approach is trying to create a list that I know that plays into my strengths. At the same time, not having a solid game plan. And what I mean by that is, okay, I've got my units that are fast. I got my units that are durable. I got my units that can fight. I got my units that can shoot. But how do I take all those units and make it into a solid game plan? Well, you're going to have guys that got to do actions and do these fill these different roles. But I think one of the things for me is sitting back and waiting for my opponent to make a mistake, right? And to bounce off of your team name, and then at that point, never let an enemy, interrupt an enemy while they're making a mistake, right? And I'm not talking about in a gotcha kind of way where it's like they're positioned 19 inches away from a Nurgle tank. Not that type of gotcha, but where you create a hole intentionally looking like I made a mistake for somebody to actually go there. And that was the game plan all along, right? So trying to set traps or...
So it's a little reactive in that sense. You're not necessarily the first one onto the objectives trying to be like, shoot me off or whatever. Like you're hiding and taking a passive approach until your opponent gives you something to chew on, basically.
That's exactly right. I've been described as cagey and things like that. That's why I think, like, when you're talking about the old days with One Wound, Black Legion, and, the only tough thing you had was Fourth World stuff. So you had to play in a way to not die if you wanted to be successful with that type of army. So my play style comes a lot from that. So a lot of times I'll have a lot of units in that, where I can deploy skinny, and then by turn 2, I'm all over the place. But it's because I'm not getting alpha stroke turn 1, because I can't afford to get alpha stroke turn 1 playing that style of army.
Right. It sounds really similar to the way I approach 40K, which is really interesting because I always find when I play CSM, the player style versus army identity is such a clash. Like CSM want to be aggro, chosen rhinos. At least that was my take on it. And I don't want to be doing that, like personally. So it's like always a little bit of a mismatch. And whenever I played that list, I didn't find it gelled for me. So that, that is what it is. But it sounds like you have found a way to make your play style, which is similar to mine, at least it sounds, that reactive caginess, apply to a very traditionally aggressive list or traditionally aggressive army archetype. So what does that look like in terms of CSM list building? Like how do you make a list that's like fluid and flexible, especially with respect to the fact that CSM costs a lot? They're an expensive army, points wise.
Yeah. So obviously there's some like key elements to my army that I like to have, and they're very expensive. Abaddon and at least 5 Terminators. So that means I have to find other units that work well with Abaddon, and also the rest of them outside of the bubble of Abaddon have to be cheap, but they also have to punch above their weight. And luckily CSM has a lot of access to cheap units that can punch above their weight. It's just finding the right mark, the right war gear, and the strategy with them. So for example, Slanesh Legionnaires, I actually prefer Slanesh Legionnaires over Chosen. And it makes me sad that it took Chosen being nerfed to 130 points for me to realize it, because they're amazing. You don't need a Lord with them. They don't need any support. They jump out of a Rhino and they get to an objective and they punch way above their weight. And people discount them because they're just Legionnaires. Like when you roll into a Custo player and you're thinking, man, if he pops that fight first stratagem, this goes to waste. But here come Legionnaires, and they think their custos can just take the hit and they don't have to waste a 2 CP. And all of a sudden, there's not many custos left to even finish off the Space Marines or the Legionnaires.
Right. The Slanesh Legionnaires punch way above their weight class. And, that makes sense. Like basically, if you're going to take Abaddon and Terminators, a minimum 500 point package right there. It's supplemented with cheap effectiveness. But like, how does that let you be cagey? When I think of Abaddon 5 Terminators or even Abaddon 10, I'm thinking this thing is sprinting across the table. That's its job.
Yeah, so the current list, I'm going with that more Abaddon Castle. So the rest of the list has to be fast and survivable. So Legionnaires and Rhinos, fast, right? So National Legionnaires and Rhinos, even a little bit faster with sustained hits on 5+ once they get to the objective, and then reroll all wounds type of thing. So I've got 20 Legionnaires and 2 Rhinos, or you could strategically reserve a squad or 2 or whatever, depending on the mission and the matchup. But you have these early units that can get out there, they can scrap, but at the same time, you can't just bring out, like, for example, say you're playing Death Guard. One of the key things with Death Guard, or most Death Guard players do, is they'll have that early unit of cultists that scout up onto the center objective and make an objective sticky early, so it forces somebody to come out and kill them. But it's not hard to kill cultists. But if you don't bring enough to bear against a rhino or a squad with a squad of legionnaires or two squad of legionnaires and inside the rhino, you're not going to kill all that. So now you're bringing people out to make mistakes to take out those early squads. And then that's where the Abaddon Castle and the rest of the fast stuff like possessed can swoop in and make them pay. So
nice. So it's kind of like a hammer and anvil type of situation where it's like you lead with your noisemen or your legionnaires and your rhino. Basically, it's like early game skirmishers. They punch way above their weight class, and because of that, your opponent probably loses the early trade with them or overcommits, and then you can swoop in hard and counterstrike, and you basically just get the game going with them. Is the idea?
That's exactly right. Force the early mistakes, and if they don't make the early mistakes, then I score primary.
So is that like the template baseline that you include in CSM list? Like you love your Abaddon Terminators, you love your Legionnaires and Rhinos. Is that the idea? And then you fill it out from there based on the tournament pack or whatever else the factors of the meta may be?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Awesome. So I think it's a really cool approach. I've never really actually mixed those two styles. I'm like full MSU or I'm like Terminator Brick, but I haven't mixed them. That's interesting. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about the tournament that you played in the list you took to it, and just like what choices you made and why the tournament pack or whatever influenced those decisions?
So this tournament used two different GW layouts with some of the GW missions and some that they had up on their own. So just being familiar with GW terrain, it was already kind of like, like for example, I'm rocking the 3 Predators. On GW terrain, almost always you're going to have that L in the back corner. That back L is just perfect for sitting 3 Predators behind. And usually there's enough coverage on the front of the building to where you could stick a Hellbrute and the Plague Bearers up under there. That way the Plague Bearers can make the home objective sticky and then start moving to the center to get like a teleport homer or something like that. So then that leaves my more open ground for those 2 Rhinos to kind of pop in there, right? And based on the matchup, like Abaddon will either deploy with the whole army or, I'll let the game develop a little because of the Legionnaires, then move the Rhinos out and bring Abaddon in front. Unless I'm playing against a pressure list, then I'll just leave Abaddon in the center of the Predators and make them come. And it's really the Legionnaires and the Plague Bearers that really force people to come to the center. And then soon as they're in the center, those Predators are outrageous, especially if you manage to get your buffs right. 6 inches of Abaddon and the Hellbrute. Those Predators are super cheap. And again, punch above their weight, but they have to have the buffs because I don't think the Predators are that great without Abaddon and a Hellbrute.
So I love the Abaddon Castle style. Abaddon basically sits in an order of reroll hits, and then the Hellbrute makes all your lethal hits, sustained hits, and you're triggering it on 5s with your packs, and everything just punches so above its weight class. But one of the challenges I've found when I'm playing that army is it is a castle, hence the name. Abaddon is one big expensive model next to a Hellbrute, which is another expensive model. They move 6 inches holding hands, and then everything has to be in a 6-inch aura around those two. It's pretty hard to maneuver it. It's fairly easy for opponents with skill to play around them a little bit. How do you navigate around those challenges?
So a lot of it is just, again, going with the player packet and the terrain I'm going to be on and practicing deployment at home. So like I'll practice deployment and I'll practice my movement phases. So, and I'll think about different armies on the other side of the table. Am I playing against Imperial Knights, Tau, or Gene Stealer Cult, or War Leaders? I might not, like if I'm playing against a melee army that's not as fast, or they lack shooting, I may deploy a little bit more aggressively and the parking lot moves a little bit faster. But depending on what I'm playing against, Abaddon might screen for the Predators, and then some matchups, Abaddon is being screened by the Predators because they're so cheap. So
Abaddon being a screen sounds kind of ridiculous. He's a 300-point beatstick support character. What's he screening for?
Well, for example, if you got some type of melee army that can tie up your tanks and stop, all of a sudden if the Predators get stopped and Abaddon and the Hellbrute are behind the Predators, where if Abaddon's in front of them, like they can't tie up Abaddon in melee with a cheap unit. In other words, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so gotcha. So it's like learning which pieces of your army to use in which scenarios, very matchup specific, which is what we're going to talk about a lot in part 2 as well. You mentioned though that you practice the deployments at home, like on your own. Do you just like have a set of terrain, you like literally put your army on the table and see how it feels to move around? How do you do that versus like theoretical opponents?
I think playing enough in like tournaments and seeing different armies. So as I'm putting the army on the table, I'm trying to picture different type of matchups and how I deploy and then also move. Because I think one thing is like, for example, say you're playing against world leaders and you're worried about them getting to you too fast. So you put your tanks too far back. But if you put them too far back and the terrain limits you, you might as well have just gotten them killed turn one because they'll never get in the game. Like knowing that this tank moves 10 inches, if I deploy it right here, am I going to get stuck halfway on the piece of terrain, or am I going to be able to clear the piece of terrain so I can actually shoot with it? So you don't want to find yourself in game one going, oh, I thought I could do that, but now it's too late because you're already moving and you're in turn one. You can't go back to deployment. So knowing what you can and can't do before you show up and where you can go is nice. I mean, it would be like just in real life, it's the, military operations. They don't just show up and go, all right, let's fight it out. No, you do recon and figure out where your guys in gun positions are going to go. Same thing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
A little bit of planning.
Okay, so what about the rest of the list? Talk to me about besides the Abaddon Castle portion. What are you trying to do with that?
So the Nurgle bikes are great because they're up and down, and they actually kind of punch above their weight. I mean, they got 12 combi weapons or 12 combi bolter shots, and then you have chain swords, power fists, 2 meltas, all on one 85-point platform that can jump up and down and have sustained hits on a 5+. So that's where like you might have like a soft target on an objective somewhere, to where they can go clear off a unit of Zangors or cultists or a unit of guardsmen to stop a 5-point primary thing, or be able to go somewhere where you can get a teleport homer behind enemy lines or something like that. So
they typically do like solo missions on like the sides of the board where nothing else might be?
Exactly. Like or punching somebody that's playing with sticky objectives and not guarding their home objectives. Because some, like there is what mission is it? It's the one that goes from the corner all the way over to the
Crucible of Battle.
Yeah, Crucible of Battle. The home objective is close enough to the edge of the board, so if somebody's playing sticky objectives and they start leaving it open, that's when the bikes can just pop in and be like, take targets of opportunity, basically. Capitalizing on those mistakes I was talking about earlier with something like the bikes. Depending on what army I'm playing against, the Nurglings might infiltrate. Like if I'm going to try to get them teleport homers somewhere early, or I'll deep strike them for late game teleport homers or actions. I almost always deep strike the possessed, or strategically reserve the possessed with the mop, because he's one of the best combos. I absolutely love it. It's another.
I had a huge question mark here. Talk to me about the master possession, the possessed. What is this unit doing? I look at this unit and I really want to like it, and I feel like it just doesn't hit that hard for what it is. Like for a 200+ point squad, it doesn't hit that hard, and then it also is easy to kill for what it is. But maybe I'm wrong.
So here's the key to them. They're just like Thousand Suns. You got to think it's not what the mop does for the possessed, but what the possessed do for the mop. He's got anti-psyker 2+. Anytime and it's precision at 18 inches, you can do a thing where make them -3 damage. But here's the beautiful part: when they're with possessed, anytime possessed do dark packs, devastating wounds. So now you have a precision shot that's devastating wounds, anti-psyker 2+.
Oh my God! So you're using this possessed squad for a little bit of a shooting tech.
Yep. So, for example, round 6, and I know we'll talk about it later game, but round 6, there's a brick of Technomancer with race. I slide in on the side of the board, boom, I kill the Technomancer in shooting. And then the mop gives him +1 to charge. So if you're coming in from strategic reserves or you rapid ingress, you're really close, slam into the race without a Technomancer. Now that squad plus the mop kill the whole unit of race. And they couldn't do that. That is some
really sneaky tech, not stuff you would consider like at all without like tons and tons of reps. I consider myself a CSM guy, and I've never thought about using the possessed to give the mop devastating wounds on the shooting attack. That's pretty clever.
And when you play against Eldar, think about all those psychers that are hiding out.
Oh yeah, just like pop 6 into the Incarn. Magnus, screw you.
Or you're playing against Grey Knights. You're rolling up on a strike squad with a strike master. You reach in there and you go pop. Now they don't fight first anymore. That took their whole game plan of, I'm going to stand here, fight first, make them pay if they want to charge me. But instead you kill the strike master and then you charge in and kill them.
At the end of the day, though, this is still 2 shots. Like, one's happened. You probably aren't spending a CP on it, or they just don't have psychers. Like, how often does this matter? I mean, some games say it's a dream case, but some games it's like non-relevant. And then
Yeah,
What
in
are you
some games,
doing with this like squad? Is it just inefficient at that point in those matches, and you just get the best you can out of it?
um, no, yes, in a nutshell, I've got a fast unit that can go anywhere on the board and can skirmish really well. They're my most expensive skirmish unit, but they're fast and they're deceivingly tough with the mop just because they get a 6-up feel no pain. So all those 3 damage weapons coming in, all of a sudden you're making a 6 here and there. The math goes down and down and down, and you still have
Yeah.
a fast unit that can go places. But yeah, it becomes an action unit, no different than the bikes. I'll put them in strategic reserves, rapid ingress them, and try to, But with profane zeal, they're still hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1s because of dark packs. The sustained hits on 6s. So
So Russell, it sounds like your deployment is real thin here, right? Like you have Abaddon, Hellbrute, Triple Predator, that's the castle. And then
yeah,
like
2
Cultists,
rhinos.
whatever, Nerdlings, whatever, and then bikes kind of floating around the edges, possessed in reserve. Like would you have screens? Is that like a thing your army cares about?
Yeah, it can have screens because that's where the plague bearers, I can either deploy them on my home objective or spread them out a little bit, and then you add the rhinos. So like if you have one of those hyper aggressive armies that want to charge you, they're going to either be charging plague bearers or rhinos. But if I'm playing against a shooting army, I can literally put everything in that back L except for the 2 predators, and those 2 predators can go up. Like you take those side buildings on the GW layout, perfect to put a predator behind, and then you put another predator on the other side. Now you got units that can get to the outside objectives really early, really fast, and then that which forces them out, and that's when the predator castle comes out in turn 2 and makes them, whoever came out to try to hurt those things is getting hurt.
So you're
And
willing
then,
to break up your Triple Predator castle to like a double and put like one on the far flank to get some game going?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. I'm starting to
So
see it. So
So it starts extremely small when you first look at it, and the whole goal is what I talked about earlier: is eliminating the alpha strike. So with it starting small, when my opponent, say I have an extremely aggressive opponent that wants to shoot or fight, their first turn they're going, man, I've got nothing to shoot at. I'm just going to go out there and he's going to make me pay. So they may wait another turn, and that's where the Legionnaires will start scoring for free. So if they wait that turn, that additional turn, that's just a whole nother turn where, all the bad stuff is ready.
right, and the Legionnaires do offer a lot of deterring board control. Like it's a Rhino, it's 10 dudes, there's 2 of them, so that's 2 Rhinos, 20 dudes, 6 squads, and they all can do stuff. That's a decent amount of board control in and of itself.
Yeah, and with them being so much, they can advance and charge. So when you tell somebody what the threat range is, they come out 3, move 6, advance. And then you're saying, oh, their max advance is, movement is 15 inches, and they can still charge. And all of a sudden, it's like, do I really want to put this unit that close on my deployment line? And you're slowly moving them back. So when they finally then they get caught on open ground by the predators trying to get back in the game.
Right. And it's not like you ever want to hit harder. I mean, you have the Abaddon Hellbrute package is like the most hard hitting thing in the game in terms of like how much you elevate your stuff and how hard Abaddon hits. So do you ever find you're struggling to kill people, or is that just not an issue?
It's not an issue. Like I found myself being able to chew through Race, C-Tans, the Incarn, Avatar Kane. I mean, like when Avatar Kane can't stand up to shooting attacks, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah, no, I mean, your army shoots. There's no question about that. So I'm really interested to kind of move the conversation into part 2 a little bit, but we're not quite there. How do you play the mission? Like, what's your primary, secondary game?
A lot of times, if I have the opportunity, I'll go fixed, which I really like Teleport Homer because the Rhinos and Nurglings and bikes really help me out with that one alone. So if I can take something like Assassinate, where I know I'm going to get the 20 points, or bring it down where I know I'm going to get the 20 points. And then even if I only get the center ones, I'm getting 15 points on Teleport Homer. That's 35 points. And if I'm denying primaries because I'm shooting you off the objectives or I'm making bad trades for them, then I beat them on the primary game. So even if they max out their secondaries, I'm within that margin of error at the 35. But as long as I beat them on primaries, I'm good to go.
Do you find it's hard to keep like an endless slew of deploy homers people? I mean, I get the case of like a Rhino or Nurglings can just do it if there's a nice ruin, but if there's not a nice ruin, you are often going to run out of resources really fast trying.
Yeah, that's in those cases, that's where I'll take the Nurglings and put them in deep strike. And then I know the bikes, because the cool thing about the bikes, unlike the Calidus, there is no requirement for them to return to the battlefield the next turn. So if you got to deep strike the Nurglings on turn 3, get you a Teleport Homer there, and then find a nice little sweet spot for the bikes to pop in where they can't get to them in a turn, Teleport Homer there, and then leave the board if they start to move that way. or if they just accept that I'm going to get another 4-point homer. The bikes do it again last turn. So between the rhinos and because the cool thing about the Legionnaires being my early skirmish units, the rhinos are also my early teleport homer units.
The other potential challenge to the deploy homers plan, because I think you've got a lot of deploy homers opportunity between the nerdlings and the rhinos and the deep striking and the bikes. But the other challenge to it is actually scoring lots of bring it downs and assassinates. And sometimes armies can't help but give it up. But other times people do have the option to play cagey and potentially force you into a much more aggressive play pattern to get those points. Has that ever been a challenge for your like self-acclaimed placid play style?
I haven't found, like, there's certain times where I'll look at it and I'll be like, that could be a trap, and I will go tactical. Like for example, Death Guard I think is a good one that you can say is a trap, because you might see a couple of units out there that got a Putrefier and a Tallyman in it, and you're like, man, I just killed those 2 squads. That's 16 points there. But those units are just tough enough that if you leave a Plague Marine and the 2 characters, they jump in the Rhino and they haul back to the back of the game and they win on secondary. So there's certain times where you kind of go, this looks real easy. But then there's other times, like, if you're playing Blood Angels or Demons, they're not going to be able to win the game without giving up Bring It Down or Assassinate.
Right.
So like for example, in a Necron matchup where there's a lot of characters, if you say take Assassinate, now they either going to try to deny the Assassinate and stay on their side of the board and play scared the whole game, which then makes the primary mission part easier. So but yeah, I've ran into it. I lost again. My one loss at LVO this last year was to that specific Death Guard scenario. I took Assassinate, and he was jumping back in Rhinos, and I lost on secondaries because I couldn't get my Assassinate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough line to draw, but I'm glad you can definitely draw that distinction. Some armies are good at denying it, or sometimes they don't even give it up, and you have to be able to play tactical. It seems like your list can, though, so I think that's awesome. And we'll definitely break down your games and just see exactly how you did it in part 2. But Russell, one more question for you before I let you go. What, if you could give one piece of advice to like aspiring Warhammer players, what would it be?
Go out in the community and find other people to play and play up. That's all I can say. Try to find players that are better than you and go get kicked in the teeth. If you can't do that, go to tournaments and just lose. Lose until you start winning. And then, that's it. Build to your play style.
Russell, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You give the Chaos players a lot of real hope. Your lists are a little bit unorthodox, but I think they really work for you, and I think they're really awesome, and there's a lot of logic behind these choices. So we're going to unpack more of that in part 2, folks. You don't want to miss it. You can catch it on patreon.com/AOW40K. That'll give you access to the part 2 of this episode, 230 plus other episodes, and our amazing Discord server. Russell, once again, thanks so much for coming on.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.